was a rough morning. I got up as my normal 4 o'clock to prepare, only to decide I really needed to make a few changes. So I was running late. I apologize. I don't know, a couple of months ago in our Wednesday morning men's meeting, men's prayer, and we read a chapter of the Bible every Wednesday morning, and then we it's not a Bible study. We read a chapter, maybe have a little discussion, but we've been bouncing around. Charlie gets to pick what we're doing, so I said some weeks ago we said, well, we got to do the minor prophets. So we start out with Joel, and I asked the question, when was Joel written? Because I'm a chronology guy. I like to know where things fit. And so it was kind of on me to research that, since I asked the question. And I forgot. I got involved. It was a week or two later. But when I started looking into it, it was like, wow, this is interesting. It's like scholars don't agree on when it was written. I said, oh no, here we go again. But anyway, it's just got me to kind of just digging into the chronology of prophets, major and minor prophets. And that's led to this little series I'm going to do for a few weeks. And we're going to be talking about prophets. So let's start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time we have together. Bless that. I pray that it will enlighten and enthuse us to look more deeply into the Bible, especially the Old Testament. I pray that the rest of the day will be productive also. We ask this in Jesus' name. So, I got my pointer. I get new glasses, and they gave me new glasses, and they gave me some glasses for working on my computer. The ones for working on my computer work great. These you're all a little fuzzy, okay? I thought I brought my reading glasses because when I wear my reading glasses, I actually see better. Yeah. Anyway, I've left them at home. So hopefully I can see. So this is going to be, I'm calling it a survey of prophets. The part is going to be, when you look at the prophets, you think of the major prophets and the minor prophets. Well, there's a lot of prophets in the Bible. And when you talk about the major and minor prophets, that's talking about kind of the period around the united and divided kingdom. And that's when most of the documented books in the Bible kind of hit in that time period. And we really won't cover that much until next week, which will be kind of the focus. So this week I thought, well, I'm going to do an introduction and kind of put things in some chronological perspective. I'm going to go through some slides, some of them very quickly. They're in your handouts because there's always a question about what's going on in the world at that time. So I included some slides that I have, and I'm going to flash by them. When you're alone, you can look at that stuff and kind of think, oh yeah, what happened when, what was going on in the world when Moses was doing the Exodus. Those things are in there. Okay, so get my computer to work. So this week we'll talk about the pre-monarchy period. Then next week we'll talk about the monarchy period through the end of the Old Testament. So a big chunk of time, but that's when the major books of the Bible, the books of prophets that have names, covers in this period. And then we'll talk about the intertestamental, and we'll end up intertestamental through into the Testament, because there's prophets in the New Testament also. And we'll cover that. And that will be our 3 weeks. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, what is a prophet? And this chronology stuff that I talked about. And then we'll hit, and I've taken this period of time, what I call the pre-monarchy period, and kind of divided it up into like 4 eras. There's the creation post-flood era, period of time, the patriarchal period, another period of time, Exodus and the conquest, I kind of put into one, and then the period of the judges. And that will be our order for today. So, what is a prophet? Well, a prophet is a person chosen by God to be a spokesman. You know, they're usually going to be giving God's message, a divine message, warnings, sometimes guidance, variety things, but it's someone who God is using to speak to the people. Okay? So, the Bible's filled with these individuals. Some, like I say, have a whole book attached to them. Some significant ones, Elijah and Elisha. They don't have their own books, but they're major parts of other books. So there's prophets throughout. Prophets play a crucial role in shaping spiritual and the moral fabric of the people. They're the spokesman for God. They bridge this divine to human relationships, and they seem to appear when there's a need with the people. There's a need, and God's going to speak to them, and he speaks through prophets. Some key characteristics: they usually have a divine calling. They're messengers of God. They're challenging usually kings, priests, or just society in general, and sometimes are involved in miracles and signs, and it's usually some kind of a symbolic action that's required that God's trying to get people's attention as to what is needed. So there's different kinds of prophets. When you hear talks about the major and minor prophets, which is what started me in this little exercise. Does everybody know what a major prophet is? We've talked about this before. The difference between a prophet and a minor prophet, yes?
How much ink is it?
That's right. It's how much ink. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and Daniel have a lot of ink. It's also very major stuff that they're dealing with, and sometimes over a longer period of time. But the minor prophets, which there's a bunch of them, we'll be talking about them a lot next week, they just have smaller amounts of ink. Some are very short books. But there's a lot of very significant stuff in what was said. There's also a lot of other Old Testament prophets. Moses was a kind of prophet. He's probably one of the most significant prophets in the Bible, and he doesn't have his own book. He has a lot of books, actually. But so there's a lot of prophets in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those. Some of them had multiple roles. They may have been prophets. They may have been judges at the same time, like Deborah and Gideon. So there's those, and then there's prophets in the New Testament. Guess what? John the Baptist was a prophet. He prophesied the coming of Christ, the Messiah. So they're New Testament prophets. And then there are false prophets, which I'm not going to spend any time talking about false prophets. I'm not going to spend any time on a debate about whether there are prophets today and when did the prophetic period end. It's very interesting to talk about, and very interesting discussion, but I ain't going there, okay? We're not going to talk about that. All right. So, we're going to do a little chronology here. We're going to start with my famous chart that I used to use in so many things, the big timeline here from creation through the early church. And of course, we're talking about this whole period. This series will cover all of this period. So I told you I got part 1, part 2, and part 3. So part 1, this kind of goes, should be fairly close time-wise. So that period, so creation, patriarchal period, Exodus, and Judges, all takes place in this 3,000 years of time. And then part 2, which is pretty heavy in major and minor prophets, of course, is the United Kingdom, David, Saul, Solomon, the divided kingdom, and then the exile, which happened. There's a couple of exiles, of the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, and then there's prophecy after that. And we'll be covering a lot of things there. And then we have the intertestamental period, Jesus in the apostolic era, and then the early church era. So we'll talk about that. That's going to just lead to the conclusion of the talk. So this is kind of the chronology of things. When I wanted to talk about this was like, I want to kind of show this stuff graphically. And so I've thrown a few slides that I picked up and that I cut and pasted out of other documents. But this one just kind of shows you the timeline of the prophets and when things happen, like here's all the judges. And but these are things for you to look at. I'm not going to spend time on them. Then I have this next series of slides, because I think it's real interesting to know not just what was going on in the biblical time, but what was going on in the Middle East or that area in general, in the world. And so these charts these things, and there's like 6 of them. So they go in time from here, and you'll see. So you can see things that were happening, like here's when fell, that's where Abram came from initially. So, and there's just different things. When in Egypt, what dynasty were we in, and maybe where we were China, or things. Everything that you could think of is kind of on. Not everything, but there's a lot of stuff. Okay, so here's Exodus and Moses, and here's somewhere's the Exodus. Oh, here it is, the Exodus, and Hotep, good grief. The second is the Pharaoh of Egypt that I think was there at the time of the Exodus, and Moses grew up in this era here, and so this is showing different things. This is like in China, certain dynasties started. So there's a lot of stuff in here, and it's just really for your information if you're interested in what was going on at the time. And it kind of puts stuff in somewhat of perspective. I think it's interesting to know. And when you get down to that, down there where I was talking about the pharaohs and stuff, there's a lot of controversy about dating of those things. So these charts are things I've pretty much have come to the conclusion that's pretty accurate. So creation to the flood. So it's a period of time in Genesis, basically Genesis 1 through 11, creation through Abraham. Okay, so that's 1 through 11. Get to chapter 12, we're now talking about the patriarchs. We're starting with Abraham. So, I've spent a lot of time, a lot of hours talking to you about this period of time. But there were things going on, and there certainly were prophets at work during this time. And so I'm just going to list a couple. We had Enoch. Remember Enoch? He didn't die. He went to heaven, right? So it's mentioned. And So it's mentioned in Genesis 5:18 through 24. It's also referenced in Jude. And if you read 18 through 24, it doesn't tell you a lot. It tells you about Enoch. But Jude ends up telling you that he prophesied that the Lord will execute judgment on all. So that's just an example. By the way, I'm only going to give a couple of 3 examples in each period. There's lots. If you start digging into the Old Testament, looking up prophets, and I guarantee you it'll keep you busy forever. So we had Lamech, who was Noah's dad, and he prophesied that his son, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So he's seeing Noah, did I say Moses? Noah is going to be important in this, and God's going to show judgment. Guess what? The flood, right? That's what happened. So Noah, of course, he was definitely a prophet, and Genesis, there's 3 books in Genesis that talk about the flood, so it's very, very detailed. But Noah was prophetic. God told him, I'm going to do this, told him to build a boat, told him all these things. He did what God said, and everything came to pass as God had foretold with him. So, any questions about that period? Okay, the patriarchal period, which is the patriarchs. We know who the patriarchs are: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and I throw in Joseph. Okay, just because I want to cover it all. What, Marie?
That's a quick question. How far apart are these eras? Are they like hundreds, thousands of years apart?
Well, that was back on my, you went back several slides, you see the one chart where I had 3 bars, and it kind of shows you the time period. Now, these individual eras,
I see.
you can look on those charts and you can see when did Abraham live? Isaac, Jacob, you can see it's on there. And then Joseph, and then this ends with Joseph before, the Egyptians the Israelites are under the control of the Egyptians. So this period, and like I said, I include Joseph, and God communicated directly. In this time, those patriarchs were also the prophets. So God spoke directly through the patriarchs and led the people, his chosen people at that time, by communicating directly with the patriarchs. So they were also the prophets. So Abraham, he gave us the Abrahamic covenant. The thing that said he prophesied that the people of Israel were going to be enslaved. So when he prophesied that, and certainly it did, they were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. The covenant of circumcision is a sign of their covenant with God. All this stuff is in Genesis 20, 12, 15, and 17. Lots of stuff about that particular period and what Abraham was up to. I leave out Isaac, not because he's not important, but there's just more stuff when you get to when you get to Jacob. So Jacob is another one of the patriarchs, and there's a lot of stuff in Genesis, throughout Genesis, that talks about Jacob. But he had a vision with Jacob's ladder. He wrestled with God or an angel, whatever, and he did a blessing on his sons that was all very prophetic. He's kind of laid out what was going to happen with them. So Jacob, then Joseph, one of the most interesting characters in the Bible. So he lives, we know his brothers basically sell him into captivity, think they kill him. But as a youth, he had dreams. He dreamed that he was going to be a leader of people, and people are going to bow down to him. He had these dreams when he was very young, which caused problems between, he would tell his older brothers, "You're going to bow down to me." And of course they got upset with him. And so he did a lot of things that I guess rubbed it in their nose, and they ended up taking care of him. He ends up, going to Egypt. He's sold into, but he's very competent. He gets elevated. He gets known as somebody who can interpret dreams. Pharaoh has to answer him. They say, this guy in prison can do it, and they bring Joseph up, and he interprets the dreams. He tells him God is interpreting these dreams, and this is what God is telling me. And because of that, Pharaoh elevates him into a high-level position. He basically becomes number 2 in all of Egypt. But he also foretold that they would be an exodus from Egypt some 400 years later. So he was in, and all this stuff is laid out in the latter chapters of Genesis. The conquest, the Exodus and the conquest are a period of time when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. Eventually, 40 something years later, they get to the Promised Land, and then they do the conquest, which takes a number of years, which is led by Joshua. So that's that period of time. And Moses, of course, is the main prophet in this period. He just had numerous things he prophesied. Maybe the greatest prophet in the Bible. Yeah. So there was no kings, and he like I said, this all happened, I believe, under Amenhotep II, Pharaoh of Egypt. That's when the Exodus took place. So it's all covered in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all of which Moses wrote. And so it chronicles all that period. Aaron and, oh my goodness, I didn't do anything here. So Aaron is Moses' big brother, a couple of years. And he gets in the picture because Moses said God wants him to go do this with Pharaoh, and he says he can't speak good. And so God said, well, your brother can. And it's his brother. So his brother kind of becomes his spokesman. And so he does a lot of the things, throw the staff down. He's involved in a lot of the stuff that happened during that period. And that's mostly in Exodus, a lot about it in Exodus 7. Miriam was Moses' sister. I was going to do a little more in-depth because I think it's his older sister. Does anybody know?
Yeah, because she's the one who cared for him.
So she's maybe older than Aaron? Okay, so I wasn't sure of that. So Now that you're mentioning it, I think you're right. I'm sure you're right. I'm not right. But anyway, so she lived in this period, and she was looked at as a prophetess within the community. Can't say she did everything right all the time, but she was a prophetess, and that was looked at by the Israelites. Joshua, who was Moses' apprentice, he was one of the Israelites that went into the promised land to spy it out, and he and Cable said that it was good, we ought to go, and everybody else said no, it's bad, it's big guys, and a lot of forts, and they're big and mean, and so, but he said, but he became Moses' right-hand man. And did he hold up his right hand, or was it maybe it was his left-hand man? Anyway, he was involved in a lot of things, but mainly God's talking to him all the time as they're doing the conquest of the promised land. Those years that Joshua led the Israelites through the promised land, capturing, taking king. God was continuously telling him what strategy, what to do. Kind of like, it's all detailed, like how did they do Jericho. And so those things are all covered, most of that stuff in Joshua's. Great reading, actually. Okay. So we got the era of the judges, and so the judges are that period of time after the conquest, before there's a king. The people are led by who? God. God was their king. But they weren't very good at following God's instruction. So there were continuously groups of them at different times are getting themselves in trouble. God would bring up a judge, somebody within the community, to give them guidance and leadership and turn them back to the right way, which they would do, and then they'd fall back eventually. But so that's the period of the judges. So it's a 400-year period, 300 to 400 years period. So we had some judges like Deborah, because there are women prophets. So we've mentioned Miriam and now Deborah. So Deborah was a military leader, but before that she was a prophetess. Remember, she would sit under the fig tree, and people would come and bring their problems to her, and she would, give them guidance. Well, she ends up leading the army, bringing Barak in and forcing him, if you will, to do what was right. And so so she was a prophetess, and she prophesied victory over their enemy at the time. And it's all kind of chronicled in Judges 4 through 5 and in 1 Samuel. Almost didn't put this one in. There's a number of places in the Bible that it talks about an unnamed man of God. But here I'm trying to talk about this one unnamed man of God who prophesied when Jeroboam, I won't get my names wrong, Jeroboam was a king of the northern kingdom and set up Bethel and Gad. He set up these and golden calves and all this stuff. There was an unnamed prophet that came and said, you should not be doing this, and told them things were going to happen, and they did. And that's kind of in 1 Kings 13. So if you looked up unnamed man of God, you'll find 3 or 4. I'm talking about only one. Remember the story? That was just early. So I just thought it was an interesting one. So one time I tried to figure out who was this unknown. Like, you can't. Gideon was another judge, and but he was also a prophet, and he, God called him to take care of things and get. He gave him a mission. Said, "You're going to do this," and he basically said, "I can't. I'm not capable." It's kind of, and God forced him into doing it. So he received direct call from via an angel, and he did a lot of sign. There was a sign. He asked God for a sign. The sign was delivered. Prove that he ought to do it. He ended up doing the right thing. I think at the end, he kind of backslid. But another interesting character, and 6 through 8 in Judges talks a lot about him. Okay, so Samuel is a judge and a prophet, very much a prophet. And he's kind of the transition guy. So he's at the end of the period of Judges, into the beginning of the Kings. So we know Samuel because he's the one that anointed Saul and David. But he was the intermediary, before that, the intermediary for the people of Israel with God. And remember, the people said, everybody else is a king. We want a king. And he kind of argued with them about it over time. Eventually, God says, let them do what they want. And he anoints, but via God's, he anoints Saul and then David. And this stuff are all in 1 Samuel. That's my very quick run through that period. There's just a lot of stuff, but I wanted to cover, want you to see that there are prophets all over the Old Testament. And when we talk about prophets, we think of major and minor prophets, and there's just a lot of prophets, a lot of prophecy throughout the Bible. Does anybody have any questions?
I did have one question on one slide about.
Oh no.
I'm sorry. I'm just curious. On Aaron, it says he prophesied to the Israelites and to Saul and David. Aaron, was he?
Oh, that's a typo. Yeah, I'm sure he didn't mean that because he didn't. I was hurriedly correcting some of these slides, and I will make that.
Sometimes copy and paste gets me, like I do one thing and I copy and paste.
Well, I kind of wanted to set up this template and use it over and over,
Yeah, exactly.
and it works, but sometimes you screw up and don't fix something. So next week we will talk about part 2, which is a really interesting period. We'll be talking about the united monarchy, Saul, David, and Solomon, and we'll talk about the divided kingdom where there's just a lot of prophets in that time, and then the exile and the post-exile period. And this is where we'll get into, fortunately, I told you in the beginning, Joel was like, oh, there's 2 different opinions of when Joel was written. And I thought, oh no, it's going to be like this. Well, it ends up there's only like Joel and Obadiah. Most of the others are pretty crisp. And when you get into things like Daniel, maybe one year we'll do Daniel in our Bible study. Yeah. But when you look at Daniel, you got to first of all realize that Daniel is not in chronological order. So to try and put when Daniel did certain things, you got to figure out what the order is. So it's a little interesting. We'll talk about that some tomorrow or next week. Any other questions?